But it's absolutely true that the global economy, to an extent that I think people don't appreciate enough, is a very complicated, intricate machine. And most economic problems come when people like try to fiddle with that machine a little bit. They're like, oh, let's turn this dial by 1 degree and see what happens. And then like, oh, it blows up. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. Tariffs is like, let's hit it with a baseball bat a couple times. Let's hit it with like a crowbar and see what happens. Like the global economy is so interconnected. And if you go to your local grocery store, Target, or Walmart, whatever it might be, and go around and look at where that stuff was made. And it's all over the world. It's like it's everywhere. And once you shut that down and put barriers on that, it can become a big problem very quickly. Why there would be a very useful case for tariffs to show that this is not black and white, and this is not, oh, all tariffs are bad. This happened in the United States during COVID. We were virtually 100% reliant on masks, N95 masks that were made in China and Korea, and not in the United States. And so when you have a medical crisis in the early days of COVID, and we're like, we need hundreds of millions of masks yesterday, they're all made somewhere else. We do not want to be in that situation. So it would absolutely make sense to have a tariff on masks to make sure that they are so expensive to import overseas that we have to start making them in the United States. That makes sense. Same with military equipment. You do not want to go to war with a country and be reliant on that country to make your military gear, your bullets and your bombs and your tanks and whatnot. Absolutely makes sense to have a tariff on that to make sure they're made in the United States. That said, so it's not black and white, but to have a blanket tariff and say everything that comes from any country, anywhere in the world, and China's going to be this to an extreme degree, is going to have a tariff on it. And whether that's between 10% for all countries or 145% from China, I've used this analogy before that if you talk to dietitians, there is a huge amount of debate over what's the best diet should you eat. Should you be keto? Should you be vegan? Like everything in between. There's so much debate. All of them agree that processed sugar is bad. Nobody thinks processed sugar is good. And tariffs are that with economists. Like there is so much debate among economists on what should the tax rate be? What should subsidies be? Should we, like free market versus subsidies? There's so much debate. No serious economist thinks that you should have a trade war. And the thing is, this is not new. We've been doing this for hundreds of years. And it's very well known that in the 1930s, the Great Depression, we put huge tariffs on in the early days of the Great Depression. They didn't know it was called the Great Depression back then because we put them on and it shut down global trade. And it's easy to think that if you put tariffs on your own country, that will make it easier to manufacture. Like all those jobs that we shipped overseas of building cars, they're all going to come rushing back to America. And it very rarely happens like that when you have a trade war. But what I mean by trade war is we put tariffs on China, they respond to put tariffs on us, and you just go tit for tat, and you go back and forth, and it's like mutually assured destruction in economic terms. I would say not necessarily Trump's views, but I would say it absolutely makes sense that there is a large chunk of America that looks back to the period of 1950s, 1960s, when we were a manufacturing powerhouse, and says, that was better than what we have now, and we should go back to that. I get why people would say that, because it's true that we have lost a lot of manufacturing jobs in the last 50 years. I think manufacturing jobs peaked in the late 1970s, and we've lost something like 10 million manufacturing jobs that we had, versus what we had back then. Mm-hmm. And I get why, if I was in that situation, I would probably feel the same. Where I would push back is the situation that we had in the 1950s and 1960s, where it was just America manufacturing powerhouse. We're a very unique period that I think is virtually impossible to bring back. The reason that you cannot reasonably expect the manufacturing powerhouse to come back as it was is, yes, we did ship jobs to China and Mexico and Canada and India that used to be in America. And that has contributed to the massive decline in manufacturing employment. But a bigger factor in there is automation. Cook of Apple gave a really interesting interview a couple weeks ago, and he said, you might think that we manufacture iPhones in China because it's cheap labor. And he said, that's not really true anymore. It used to be, but China is not the cheap labor country anymore. That's moved on to Bangladesh and Cambodia and other places. The reason they manufacture in China is expertise. And I think it's okay to admit, and people should admit, that your country and also your company and you individually can be very good at some things and not very good at others. China is just extremely good and extremely talented at particularly like low-end manufacturing. Low end can be anything from, inflatable swimming pools on up to like basic electronics. They're extremely good at it. I was talking to a CEO a couple weeks ago, and he said, and he's generalizing here, but he said, if you go to a Chinese factory and you say, I want this part made, and here's step 1, step 2, step 3 on how to make it, they will do it better than anybody in the world. Nobody can beat them at that. But if you go to that same factory and you say, please go design me a new part, they're not very good at it. Americans are way better at that. And that's why the back of your iPhone says designed in California, made in China. Like, it's just specialization of labor. And I think America is the best in the world at a couple things: entrepreneurship, technology, services, and like high-end manufacturing, like planes and rockets. And we're not the best in the world at low-end manufacturing. And that's okay. That's not an insult. That's not a put down. There's specialization of labor. And so I think China just got very good at one thing during a time when we've always been very, very good at different things. And I think that is why global is like, why for a lot of people, not for everybody. So if you disagree with this, I get it. By why the economic system works so damn well over the last 30 years is because we really got good at specialization of labor. You design the iPhone, you make the iPhone, we're both better off for it. So because we got so good at automation, even if we bring manufacturing back to America, and that we still do a lot of manufacturing in America, it doesn't require the amount of employment that it used to. It doesn't require the amount of manpower. And the people who do work on Tesla manufacturing lines, by and large, are working on computers overseeing the robots. I mean, here's one stat that I thought was always interesting to me. In 1950, there was a US steel plant in Gary, Indiana. It produced 5 million tons of steel and had 30,000 workers. Today, it's still operating. It produces 8 million tons of steel and has 2,000 workers. So it's producing more steel today than it was in the 1950s. And they went from 30,000 workers to 2,000. Because what used to be done with biceps and backs and shoulders is now done with machines and robots. And it's no different than what happened in agriculture, where a farm 200 years ago was rakes and shovels, and today it's tractors and combines. Like, that same thing happened to assembly. So to wrap all that up, like, I understand and I empathize with people who say, we need to bring back manufacturing to America. We lost what we once had. I get that and I respect it. But I think the unique circumstances and automation makes it just extremely unlikely to ever happen. So anyone giving firm predictions of, oh, here's what's going to happen next, that's not how any of this works. But you can say, though, that if the tariffs last, one of two things will happen, or both of these two things will happen. Things that we import will get much more expensive, or what's more likely in places like China, if it's 145%, is the trade just stops. And then you're probably a matter of weeks away from empty shelves for certain products in certain cases. I mean, if you're buying, a pair of slippers from China for $1, and now all of a sudden they're $2.45. If you're an importer, for a lot of those situations, they'll say, like, it's just not going to work. Or if the iPhone that used to cost $1,000 is now going to cost $2,500, Apple might just say, there's not really a market for that. We can't really sell those. Let's just pause and wait for things to happen. We're already seeing that. I'm sure this news will change by the time this airs. This is moving so quickly, but our shipping container imports from China have plunged in recent weeks, which is exactly what you would expect when you put that high of a tax on it. I mean, if you were buying a house for $1 million and all of a sudden they put on 145% tax on that, you're probably not going to buy the house. The two likely outcomes, if it persists, are much higher prices and empty shelves. And I don't think anyone knows when or to the extent that could happen. And the button on the desk that says end this all could be pressed before that happens. But if it persists, that's what's likely to occur.